Mike's knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel of his car. The dull hum of the rain on the roof did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside him. A sleek, five-star hotel loomed in the distance, its neon sign flickering like a beacon of betrayal. Tonight was the night he'd get the truth, hard evidence to confirm what his gut had been warning him for months. Michelle had become a stranger lately. Her once warm smile was now laced with secrecy. Late-night phone calls, vague excuses about work, and a suspicious need to guard her phone. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Yet, every time Mike tried to approach her, she deflected with such skill that he doubted himself. But not tonight. Tonight, doubt would finally die. His phone vibrated on the dashboard, and he glanced down. It was a text from Isabella, his longtime friend and confidant. She'd been his anchor during this ordeal, never judging, always supportive. Cameras in place. If she shows up, you'll get the proof you need. Mike exhaled shakily, typing back, "Thanks. I'll keep you posted." Isabella had done more than lend an ear. She had helped him install hidden cameras at the restaurant where Michelle often claimed to be meeting clients. She had also pointed out the hotel that Michelle had begun visiting regularly, giving him the tools to find clarity in his crumbling marriage. His eyes darted back to the hotel entrance, heart pounding. Moments later, the doors swung open, and there she was, Michelle, her auburn hair glistening under the streetlights. She wasn't alone. A tall, broad-shouldered man walked beside her, his hand resting casually on her lower back. Michelle's laugh rang out, carefree and intimate, as she looked up at him with a smile Mike hadn't seen in years. A lump formed in Mike's throat, but he forced himself to stay still, to remain focused. He grabbed his phone and snapped several pictures, the cold glow of the screen illuminating his shaking hands. The pair disappeared inside, and Mike felt the weight of betrayal settle over him. He sat in his car for what felt like an eternity, the rain masking the tears streaming down his face. Later that night, back at his apartment, Isabella handed him the footage she'd collected from the cameras. They watched in silence as the truth unfolded on the screen. Michelle wasn't just unfaithful. She was exuberant, glowing in a way Mike hadn't seen in years. The man beside her wasn't just a fling. He was a replacement. Mike clenched his jaw, his emotions a whirlwind of anger, humiliation, and heartbreak. He paused the video, staring at Michelle's smiling face frozen on the screen. "This isn't just cheating," he muttered. "She's living another life." Isabella placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "What are you going to do?" Mike inhaled deeply, the first glimmers of resolve breaking through the despair. "I'm not going to yell or cry. I'm going to make her feel what I've felt all this time." Mike's initial heartbreak hardened into cold determination. He wasn't a man to lash out in anger. He preferred precision, and Michelle's betrayal deserved nothing less. If she had treated their marriage like a disposable commodity, then he would ensure she paid the price. Not in anger, but in calculated devastation. The flash drive sat on his desk like a loaded weapon. It contained everything: photos, videos, timestamps. There was no room for denial. But Mike knew simply confronting Michelle wasn't enough. He wanted to ensure she couldn't wiggle out of the consequences. Michelle's parents were pillars of their tight-knit community. Her father, a retired judge, and her mother, a well-respected charity organizer, were proud of their family's squeaky-clean reputation. They adored Mike, often praising him as the perfect husband. Sending them the evidence would shatter the pedestal Michelle stood on. "Are you sure about this?" Isabella asked as she watched Mike draft the email to Michelle's parents. She leaned against the kitchen counter, concern etched on her face. "Positive," Mike replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "She made her choices. Now, she'll face the fallout." The subject line read, "Something you need to see." Beneath it, Mike wrote a short, polite note explaining the situation, attaching the damning footage. He hovered over the send button for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing his mind. Then, with a deep breath, he clicked it. "Done," he said, leaning back in his chair. Isabella nodded, though her eyes still held a hint of worry. "What about you? What's your next move?" Mike opened a drawer and pulled out a neatly prepared stack of divorce papers. "She'll get these tomorrow. I'm giving her 1 week to pack her things and leave. No discussions, No excuses. It's over. Isabella's lips tightened into a grim line. Good. She doesn't deserve a second more of your time. The next evening, Mike waited for Michelle in their living room. He had rehearsed this moment in his head a dozen times, ensuring every word hit its mark. When she walked in, her cheerful demeanor immediately faltered at the sight of him sitting there, a flash drive in his hand. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone uneasy. Mike motioned for her to sit. "We need to talk." Michelle hesitated, but eventually sat across from him. The silence was heavy, suffocating. He placed the flash drive on the coffee table between them. "This contains everything. You've been lying to me, sneaking around, disrespecting everything we built together. And now, I have proof." Michelle's eyes widened, her face going pale. "Mike, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," he cut her off sharply. "Spare me the lies. I sent this to your parents earlier today. They know, Michelle. Everyone knows." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You sent it to my parents?" "Yes," Mike said coldly, sliding the divorce papers across the table. "And these are for you. You have 1 week to leave this house. After that, I'll file these and move on with my life." Michelle stared at him, her shock quickly morphing into anger. "You're overreacting. This isn't what you think." "It's exactly what I think," Mike interrupted, his voice steely. "And if you try to deny it, I'll make sure the whole town sees that footage." For the first time, Michelle was speechless. Mike stood, looking down at her with a calmness that masked the storm inside him. "You made your choices, Michelle. Now live with them." As he walked out of the room, her voice followed him, pleading, accusing, desperate. But Mike didn't turn back. His plan was in motion, and there was no stopping it now. Vudman Babidum, April 1st, 2025, 15:33. Part 3, The Fallout. The morning after their confrontation, Michelle sat alone at the dining table, her fingers trembling around a coffee mug. She hadn't slept. The flash drive was still where Mike had left it, an unspoken challenge she didn't dare accept. The divorce papers sat beside it, an unwelcome reminder of the chaos she'd unleashed. Her phone buzzed violently on the table, snapping her out of her daze. It was her mother. Michelle hesitated, dreading the conversation, but ignoring it wasn't an option. "Hi, Mom," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Don't you, hi, Mom me," her mother snapped, her voice seething with barely contained fury. "What the hell have you done, Michelle? Your father and I watched the video last night, and we're disgusted. How could you betray Mike like this?" Michelle winced, her mother's words cutting deeper than she expected. "Mom, it's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," her mother interrupted. "Mike didn't send this lightly. He's heartbroken, Michelle. And frankly, we're ashamed of you. We raised you better than this." The call ended abruptly, leaving Michelle staring at her phone, her ears ringing. The weight of her parents' disappointment hit her like a freight train. For the first time, she realized the full scope of what Mike had done. By sending the evidence to her parents, he had stripped her of her safety net. Meanwhile, Mike sat in his home office, staring at his laptop. The calm exterior he'd maintained the night before had begun to crack. Despite everything, he felt a pang of guilt for involving Michelle's parents. He had always respected them, and now they were collateral damage in his war against her betrayal. His phone buzzed, and a message from Isabella appeared. "Isabella, are you okay?" "Mike, I don't know. It's hitting me harder than I thought." "Isabella, you did the right thing. Don't second-guess yourself." Mike sighed, running a hand through his hair. Isabella was right, but it didn't make it any easier. He decided to distract himself and headed to the gym, a place where he could channel his frustration into something productive. At the gym, he spotted an old friend, Jason, who immediately noticed Mike's tense demeanor. "Hey man, you look like you're about to punch a hole in the wall. What's up?" Mike hesitated, but Jason had always been a straight shooter. "Michelle cheated on me. I caught her, got proof, and confronted her last night. Sent the evidence to her parents too." Jason's eyes widened. "Damn, that's intense. How are you holding up?" "Barely," Mike admitted. "I'm angry, but more than that, I feel empty. Like everything I believed in was a lie. Jason nodded, his expression serious. Look, you're doing what you need to do. But don't let this consume you. You're better than that. The gym session helped, if only a little. By the time Mike returned home, he felt a small sense of clarity. But as soon as he walked through the door, he heard Michelle's voice. She was on the phone, pacing the living room. I don't care what he said. This is my house too, and I'm not going anywhere without a fight. Mike stepped into the room, his presence immediately silencing her. Talking to your lawyer already? He asked coolly. Michelle hung up, her expression defensive. You're being unreasonable, Mike. We've been married for 10 years. You can't just throw me out like this. You threw our marriage out the second you decided to cheat, he replied, his voice calm but firm. This is over, Michelle. You have 6 days left. Use them wisely. Her eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stormed past him, slamming the door to their bedroom. The house was unbearably quiet after that. Every sound echoed, amplifying the tension. Mike retreated to his office, where he found another message from Isabella. Isabella, how'd it go with Michelle today? Mike, she's digging her heels in. It's going to get messy. Isabella, do you want me to come over? Mike, not yet. I need to handle this on my own for now. Vudman Bobidum, April 1st, 2025, 15:33. Despite his resolve, a part of Mike longed for Isabella's presence. She had been his anchor through this ordeal, offering support without judgment. He wondered if their bond could become something more, but he pushed the thought aside. One battle at a time. The next few days were a blur of tension and awkward avoidance. Michelle made no effort to apologize or take responsibility, instead focusing on her defense. She contacted a lawyer, presumably to challenge Mike's demand for her to leave the house. On the 4th day, Mike received a call from Michelle's father. Mike, this is Frank. Can we talk? Mike hesitated, unsure of what to expect. Of course. Frank's voice was measured but firm. First, let me say that I'm deeply sorry for what my daughter has done. You didn't deserve this. Thank you, Mike said, surprised by the older man's candor. That said, Frank continued, I'd like to ask you to reconsider giving Michelle more time. She's in a bad place right now, and forcing her out so quickly might not be the best solution. Mike felt his jaw tighten. With all due respect, Frank, she made her choices. I'm not going to compromise my healing for her comfort. Frank sighed. I understand. Just think about it, okay? As the call ended, Mike felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had set the terms, but the path forward was anything but clear. Vudman Bobidum, April 1st, 2025, 15:33. Part 4. Lines in the Sand. The days crawled by as the tension in the house thickened. Michelle, no longer able to pretend everything was normal, began to lash out in small, calculated ways. She left her things scattered around the living room, refused to clean up after herself, and slammed doors loud enough to make the walls shudder. Mike ignored her as much as he could, but each passive-aggressive gesture chipped away at his patience. He spent more time outside the house, finding refuge at the gym, at work, or at coffee shops where he could think clearly. Isabella checked in regularly, her messages a lifeline during the chaos. Isabella, has she left yet? Mike, still here. She's making it as hard as possible. Isabella, do you need me to come over? Help move things along? Mike, not yet, but I might take you up on that. By the 5th day, Michelle's defiance took a new turn. She invited her lover, Ryan, over to the house. Mike came home to find the two of them sitting in the kitchen, laughing over coffee like it was any other day. Mike froze in the doorway, his blood boiling. What the hell is this? Michelle looked up, her face a mixture of smugness and defiance. This is my house too, Mike. I can invite whoever I want. Ryan smirked, leaning back in his chair. Relax, man. We're just talking. The sheer audacity of it left Mike momentarily speechless. He turned his attention to Michelle, his voice deadly calm. You have no respect left, do you? Respect? Michelle scoffed. Don't talk to me about respect. You humiliated me in front of my parents and threw our marriage away without even trying to fix things. Mike couldn't believe what he was hearing. I didn't throw anything away, Michelle. You did that the moment you decided to cheat. Ryan stood, clearly enjoying the confrontation. Maybe you weren't giving her what she needed, man. Ever think about that? Mike took a step forward, his fists clenched, but then stopped himself. Ryan wasn't worth it. You're both pathetic, he said, his voice steady. Enjoy the next 2 days, Michelle, because after that, you're out of here. He turned and left, slamming the door behind him. His hands trembled as he got into his car, the anger coursing through him like fire. He drove aimlessly for a while, needing to cool off before returning. Eventually, he pulled into a small park and called Isabella. She answered on the first ring. Mike, what happened? He told her everything, his voice tight with frustration. Isabella listened patiently, her tone calm and soothing. She's trying to provoke you, she said when he finished. She wants you to lose control so she can play the victim. Don't give her that power. I don't know how much more I can take, Mike admitted. She brought him into my house, Bella. My house. Your house, Isabella repeated firmly. And you're handling this the right way. Stay calm. 2 more days, and this will be over. Her confidence bolstered him, and he thanked her before ending the call. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a small moment of peace in the storm that had become his life. When he returned home later that evening, the house was quiet. Michelle and Ryan were gone, but she had left a note on the kitchen counter. You'll regret this, Mike. He crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash. Regret wasn't something he was feeling. The 6th day arrived, and Mike could feel the end in sight. He spent the morning packing up Michelle's belongings, placing her clothes and personal items into neatly labeled boxes. He didn't want her dragging this out any longer than necessary. Michelle returned around noon, her face pale and drawn. She didn't acknowledge Mike as she walked into the house, but when she saw the boxes, her eyes widened. What the hell is this? Your things, Mike said simply. You have until tomorrow to take them and leave. She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. Vudman Babidum, April 1st, 2025, 15:33. Finally, she said, You're really doing this, aren't you? Yes, he said firmly. I am. For the first time, Michelle looked genuinely shaken. Her bravado crumbled, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I don't know where to go, she whispered. Mike felt a flicker of pity but quickly squashed it. This was the bed she had made, and now she had to lie in it. That's not my problem, Michelle. You have family. You have Ryan. Figure it out. Her head snapped up, her eyes red and angry. You're such a cold bastard, Mike. After everything we've been through, you don't even care. I cared, he said quietly, but you killed that when you betrayed me. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Mike avoided Michelle as much as possible, retreating to his office and counting down the hours. The 7th day arrived like a long-awaited storm. Michelle packed her belongings into Ryan's car while Mike watched from the doorway. She didn't say a word as she loaded the last box, but when she turned to leave, she hesitated. You'll regret this, she said again, her voice trembling with anger and something that might have been fear. Mike didn't respond. He simply watched as she got into the car and drove away. For the first time in weeks, the house was silent. Mike closed the door, leaning against it as the weight of everything finally hit him. The storm was over, but the rebuilding had just begun. The emptiness of the house felt both liberating and suffocating. Mike stood in the center of the living room, the silence pressing against his ears. For the first time in years, there were no arguments, no passive-aggressive remarks, no Michelle. He looked around at the space that now belonged solely to him. The coffee table bore the faint ring of a mug Michelle used to leave there despite his repeated complaints. The couch still had her blanket draped over the side. It was a battlefield, littered with remnants of a war he had fought quietly for far too long. Taking a deep breath, Mike grabbed a trash bag and began to purge. He threw away the blanket, wiped down the table, and moved through the house like a man on a mission. Every item that reminded him of Michelle was either boxed up or thrown out. The cleansing process wasn't just physical, it was mental. By the time evening rolled around, The house felt lighter, as if it had exhaled along with him. Mike sat on the freshly vacuumed couch, staring at the bare walls. He realized then how much of his life had been dedicated to accommodating Michelle's tastes. The decor, the furniture, even the color of the curtains. None of it had ever been his choice. That night, he sent Isabella a picture of the cleared-out living room. Mike, she's gone. The house is mine again. Isabella, finally. How does it feel? Mike, strange. Quiet. Isabella, quiet is good. Quiet means peace. Mike smiled at her words. Isabella always had a way of cutting through the chaos and reminding him what mattered. The next morning, he woke up feeling lighter. He made himself a coffee and sat on the back porch, watching the sun rise. It was the first time in years he truly enjoyed the view, and he wondered why he hadn't done this more often. Later that day, Isabella stopped by unannounced, carrying a bag of groceries and a bright smile. "Thought you could use some company," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Mike chuckled. "You always did have a way of taking over. Someone has to. You're terrible at taking care of yourself," she teased, setting the bag on the counter. They spent the afternoon cooking together, laughter filling the once tense house. Isabella had a way of bringing life into a room, and for the first time in a long while, Mike felt like he could breathe. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. Isabella asked about his plans for the future, and Mike admitted he hadn't thought that far ahead. "Maybe I'll start with redecorating," he said. "This place could use a fresh start." "Good idea," Isabella said, sipping her wine. "But make it your own this time. No more beige curtains." Mike laughed. "Agreed. No beige." As the days turned into weeks, Mike found himself leaning on Isabella more and more. She helped him pick out new furniture, choose paint colors, and even sort through his old belongings. Their friendship deepened in ways Mike hadn't expected, and he started to see her in a new light. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Isabella turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "I always knew you'd come out of this stronger, but I didn't expect you to look this happy so soon." Mike shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "I guess I forgot what it felt like to just be myself. Michelle and I, things weren't good for a long time." Isabella reached over and squeezed his hand. "Well, you deserve this, Mike. You deserve to be happy." Her touch lingered a moment longer than usual, and for the first time, Mike felt a spark of something more. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a friend but someone who had been by his side through it all. The moment passed, and Isabella pulled her hand away, clearing her throat. "So, what's next on the house project list?" she asked, her tone light. Mike smiled, deciding to let the moment go for now. "New curtains, obviously." They both laughed, the sound carrying through the crisp evening air. Vudman Babidum, April 1st, 2025, 1534. Part 6. Unveiling the Future. Mike woke up the next morning with an unusual sense of clarity. The house felt alive again, not just because it was physically brighter or cleaner, but because it finally felt like his. He didn't have to navigate around Michelle's preferences anymore. Every decision, every choice, was his alone. He spent the day painting the walls a fresh, warm gray, something that suited his taste. The process was therapeutic, the steady rhythm of the roller on the wall mirroring the steady pace of his newfound life. Every stroke felt like he was erasing the remnants of his past and creating a blank canvas for his future. As the evening approached, Mike received a text from Michelle. "Michelle, I'll come by tomorrow to pick up the rest of my things." Mike stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. He didn't want to see her, didn't want her presence to taint the progress he'd made. But he also knew this was inevitable. "Mike, fine. Come early. I'll leave the door unlocked. I won't be here." The thought of being near her still churned his stomach, and he decided to spend the day out with Isabella. She had texted earlier, suggesting they go furniture shopping. When Isabella arrived, she was wearing a vibrant red scarf that brought out the warmth in her hazel eyes. Mike couldn't help but smile at her energy. "Ready to overhaul your bachelor pad?" she teased, climbing into his truck. "Absolutely," Mike said, pulling out of the driveway. The furniture store was a whirlwind of choices. Isabella dragged Mike from display to display, enthusiastically pointing out pieces that she thought would suit him. At one point, she plopped down on a plush leather couch and gestured for him to sit next to her. "This one's perfect," she declared. Mike hesitated, then sat down. It was comfortable, more comfortable than anything he and Michelle had ever owned. "You're right," he admitted, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Told you," Isabella said, grinning. As they finalized the purchase, Isabella looked at him with a playful smirk. "You know, if you keep letting me make all the decisions, this place is going to end up looking like my apartment." "Could be worse," Mike said, laughing. The comment hung in the air, and they both fell silent for a moment. There was something unspoken between them, something that had been growing quietly in the background. On the drive home, Mike found himself glancing at Isabella out of the corner of his eye. She was scrolling through her phone, humming softly to the music on the radio. It struck him how natural this felt, how easy it was to be with her. Back at the house, they unloaded the new furniture together, laughing as they struggled to fit the couch through the doorway. Once it was finally inside, they collapsed onto it, breathless and laughing. "This already feels more like home," Mike said, looking around. "It's because it is," Isabella said, her voice soft. Mike turned to her, his smile fading as their eyes met. The air between them felt charged, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Isabella leaned closer. "Mike," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. But before she could finish, the sound of a car door slamming outside shattered the moment. Mike's stomach dropped. "She's early," he muttered, standing up quickly. Michelle's voice echoed through the house as she stepped inside. "Mike? I'm here for my stuff." Isabella stood too, her expression unreadable. "I should go," she said, grabbing her coat. Mike reached out, his hand brushing against her arm. "You don't have to." But Isabella shook her head, offering him a small, reassuring smile. "This is your battle, Mike. I'll see you later." She slipped out the back door just as Michelle walked into the living room. Her eyes swept over the new furniture, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "Redoing everything already?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Yes," Mike said firmly. "It's my house now." Michelle rolled her eyes and started gathering her things. Vudman Babidum, April 1st, 2025, 15:34. The tension in the room was palpable, but Mike refused to let her rattle him. As she packed up the last of her belongings, Michelle paused and turned to him. "You know, you didn't have to make this so dramatic. We could have worked things out." Mike laughed bitterly. "You mean I could have ignored your affair and pretended everything was fine?" "No, thanks." Michelle's expression hardened. "You'll regret this, Mike. You think you're so strong now, but you'll realize what you've lost." "No," Mike said calmly. "I've already realized what I've gained." Michelle huffed, grabbing her bag and storming out. The door slammed shut behind her, and for the first time, Mike felt a profound sense of closure. He sank back onto the couch, the silence settling around him like a comforting blanket. This was his home now, his life, and for the first time in years, he was in control of it. And as the sun set outside, painting the room in warm, golden light, Mike allowed himself to hope for the future, for happiness, and maybe even for love. Vudman Babidum, April 1st, 2025, 15:34. Part 7. The Turning Point. As the door clicked shut behind Michelle, the silence in the house was deafening, but for Mike, it was a relief. He sat on the couch for a moment, letting the reality sink in. The chapter with Michelle was officially over, and while there was still pain, there was also an undeniable sense of freedom. He looked around the room, the new furniture blending seamlessly with the fresh paint on the walls. This was his space now, a blank canvas for a life he could shape without compromise. Mike's thoughts drifted to Isabella. The way she had effortlessly brought life into his home earlier that day, her laughter filling the air like music. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was more than just a friend helping him navigate his divorce. There was a connection there, something he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge before. Determined to clear his mind, Mike decided to take a drive. He grabbed his keys and headed out, the cool evening air invigorating as he rolled down the truck's windows. He found himself driving aimlessly, the city lights blurring into streaks of color as he let his thoughts wander. After about an hour, Mike pulled into the parking lot of a small coffee shop he used to frequent years ago. It was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered around. He ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching the world pass by outside. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. "Isabella, how are you holding up?" Mike smiled at the message, her thoughtfulness warming him in a way he hadn't expected. "Mike, better than I thought I would. Thank you for today." A few seconds later, his phone buzzed again. "Isabella, you don't have to thank me. That's what friends are for. But if you ever need to talk, I'm here." Mike stared at the screen, her words stirring something in him. He wanted to reply, to say something meaningful, but the words didn't come. Instead, he finished his coffee and headed home. The house was quiet when he returned, the emptiness a stark contrast to the chaos it had held just a few weeks ago. Mike grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat on the back porch, the cool night air brushing against his skin. He thought about the man he used to be, the man who had settled for a toxic marriage, who had ignored the warning signs because he was too afraid to face the truth. That man was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, someone who knew his worth. The sound of his phone buzzing pulled him from his thoughts again. This time, it was a call from Isabella. "Hey," he said, answering. "Hey," she replied, her voice soft. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I know today was a lot." "I'm okay," Mike said, and for the first time, he meant it. "Actually, I think I'm more than okay. It feels good to have the house to myself, to know I'm not walking on eggshells anymore." "That's good to hear," Isabella said. "You deserve that, Mike. You deserve to be happy." "Thanks," he said, pausing for a moment. "You know, I don't think I've ever thanked you properly for everything you've done for me. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Isabella spoke. "You don't have to thank me, Mike. I'm just glad I could be there for you." The conversation lingered, neither of them wanting to hang up. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a mutual respect and admiration that had grown stronger over the past few weeks. As Mike finally said goodnight and ended the call, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of it. He sat on the porch for a while longer, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky. The past was behind him, and the possibilities ahead felt infinite. And as he went to bed that night, Mike couldn't help but think of Isabella, the way her laughter had filled his home, the way her presence had made everything feel a little less heavy. Vudman Babidum, April 1st, 2025, 1534. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He was ready to face it, and he wasn't going to do it alone. Vudman Babidum, April 1st, 2025, 1535. Part 8. New Horizons. The morning light filtered through the curtains, painting the room in soft, golden hues. For the first time in years, Mike woke up feeling truly rested. The weight that had hung over him during his marriage was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of hope. He stretched and made his way to the kitchen, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. The silence of the house felt different today, not empty, but peaceful. He took a sip of coffee and leaned against the counter, his mind turning to the day ahead. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. Michelle was gone, and so was the toxicity she brought with her. The divorce proceedings were moving forward smoothly, thanks in part to the irrefutable evidence Mike had gathered. Michelle had tried to play the victim at first, but her parents' disappointment and the clarity of the proof left her with little room to argue. As Mike scrolled through his phone, he saw a message from Isabella. "Isabella, morning. I'm heading to the farmer's market today. Want to join me?" He smiled and typed back, "Sounds great. What time?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Meet me there at 10? We'll grab some fresh bread and maybe lunch after." Mike felt a flicker of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. He quickly finished his coffee, showered, and got ready. When he arrived at the market, Isabella was already there, her arms full of flowers and produce. She waved when she saw him, her smile lighting up her face. "Hey, you made it," she said, handing him a bouquet of sunflowers. "For me," he joked, taking them. "Consider it a housewarming gift," she said with a grin. They spent the morning wandering through the market, sampling cheeses and picking out fresh vegetables. Mike found himself laughing more than he had in years, the weight of his past slipping further away with each moment he spent with Isabella. Over lunch at a small cafe near the market, their conversation turned more personal. "You know," Isabella said, stirring her coffee, "I always wondered why you stayed with Michelle for so long. You're such a good guy, Mike. You didn't deserve any of what she put you through." Mike sighed, his gaze drifting to the street outside. "I think, for a long time, I didn't believe I deserved better. I told myself I had to make it work, no matter what. But now, I see how much I gave up trying to hold on to something that was already gone." Isabella reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You're a good man, Mike. And now you get to start fresh." Her words struck a chord, and he realized she was right. For the first time, he had the chance to build a life that made him happy, a life where he wasn't constantly second-guessing himself or trying to appease someone who didn't appreciate him. As they walked back to their cars, Isabella hesitated. "Hey, do you want to come over for dinner tonight? Nothing fancy, just some pasta and wine." Mike felt a warmth spread through him. "I'd like that. What time?" "7," she said, her smile widening. "7 it is," he said, already looking forward to it. That evening, Mike arrived at Isabella's house with a bottle of wine. She greeted him at the door, her hair slightly tousled from cooking. The smell of garlic and fresh herbs filled the air, and he couldn't help but feel at home. Over dinner, their conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about everything: work, childhood memories, their dreams for the future. As the night wore on, Mike realized how much he valued Isabella's presence in his life. When the meal was over, they moved to the couch, each holding a glass of wine. The atmosphere was comfortable, yet charged with unspoken emotions. "Mike," Isabella said softly, breaking the silence, "I need to say something." He turned to her, his heart pounding slightly. "What is it?" "I don't know where this is going, but I just want you to know. I care about you. A lot. And whatever happens, I'm here for you." Mike felt a lump in his throat. For so long, he had felt alone, even in his marriage. Vudman Babidum, April 1st, 2025, 15:35. But now, sitting here with Isabella, he felt something he hadn't in years: hope. "I care about you too," he said, his voice steady. "More than I realized." Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything felt right. As the night drew to a close, Mike drove home feeling a sense of peace and anticipation. His life had been turned upside down, but out of the chaos had come something beautiful. Michelle's betrayal had been the end of one chapter, but it had also paved the way for a new beginning. And as he fell asleep that night, Mike couldn't help but feel grateful for the journey that had brought him here.